Emerson's Self-Reliance was first published in 1841 in his second essay collection. It is perhaps his most famous work. This essay, on what he calls self-culture, contains many of his best-known aphorisms. Take, for example, the widely quoted line, "A foolish consistency is the hobgoblin of little minds, adored by little statesmen and philosophers and divines." Self-reliance encapsulates something perhaps transhistorical about American ideology, yet at the same time it is deeply embedded in 19th century thought and culture. It advocates a deep belief in individual identity. Emerson writes, "To believe your own thought, to believe that what is true for you in your private heart is true for all men, that is genius." But at the same time, he leaves open the question of the existence or even the essence of what he refers to as the Aboriginal self. There's something perverse about giving a lecture on or a reading of this essay. It has to be read outside of institutions, outside of school. Emerson encourages us to be distrustful of accepting another's interpretation. "Trust thyself," he writes. He asks us to reject communities of opinion, what we now call the wisdom of the crowd, and favor an expression of our own sense of things, in terms of reading an Emerson essay, our own interpretation of the text. Self-reliance also cautions us against our increasing reliance on technology. Emerson writes of the problems facing the civilized man of his moment. His notebooks impair his memory, his libraries overload his wit, the insurance office increases the number of accidents, and it may be a question whether machinery does not encumber. Instead of an account or an interpretation of this essay, I'll offer two ways into the text. The first, an observation about the form of the essay, and secondly, some historical and cultural context. There is a key moment in the essay when Emerson pauses in an attempt to describe the indescribable sense of intuition, the sublime object of self-reliance. And now at last, the highest truth on this subject remains unsaid, probably cannot be said. For all that we say is the far-off remembering of the intuition. That thought, by what I can now nearest approach to say it, is this: when good is near you, when you have life in yourself, that is not by any known or accustomed way. You shall not discern the footprints of any other. You shall not see the face of man. You shall not hear any name. The way, the thought, the good shall be wholly strange and new. Emerson's texts repeat this experience through form. The essays seek to produce close encounters with the strange and new. His language circles ideas, and for a brief moment, the space of a few words or a couple of phrases, this idea comes into sharp focus, and then the thought moves on. We can read his essays in a similar manner. Self-reliance provides us with a methodology for reading the essay, in which we come not face-to-face with Emerson, but to an imaginative site, something like the bare common of his nature essay, where, in the absence of others, and in the absence of ourself, we discover a new perception. Emerson frequently spoke on the Lyceum circuit to a mostly middle-class audience, filled with professionals, laborers, and some women. He also addressed young people, students in colleges and professional schools like Harvard and Dartmouth. Self-reliance seems addressed to both audiences, to those at the beginning and those already launched into their careers. This moment was the birth of many new professions, the origins of the American middle class, and the creation of a professional culture that linked class stability to these emergent categories of employment. Emerson's emphasis on individualism and going it alone spoke to these people, yet self-reliance encourages a tenacity not to the profession, but to the self. In the following long paragraph, Emerson writes of the prospect for self-reliance in this new professional culture. If our young men miscarry in their first enterprise, they lose all heart. If the young merchant fails, men say he is ruined. If the finest genius studies at one of our colleges and is not installed in an office within 1 year afterwards, in the cities or suburbs of Boston or New York, it seems to his friends and to himself that he is right in being disheartened and in complaining the rest of his life. A sturdy lad from New Hampshire or Vermont, who in turn tries all the professions, who teams it, farms it, peddles, keeps a school, preaches, edits a newspaper, goes to Congress, buys a township, and so forth in successive years, and always, like a cat, falls on his feet, is worth 100 of these city dolls. He walks abreast with his days and feels no shame in not studying a profession, for he does not postpone his life, but lives already. 19th century listeners and readers would well understand the precarious world inhabited by this sturdy lad. No longer would a person stay in a single occupation for the entirety of his life, the one occupied by his father. For some Americans, almost exclusively middle-class white men, there was now, in the middle of the 19th century, the possibility of some choice of vocation. Emerson was invited in 1838 by a group of students to give a lecture at Harvard Divinity School. Emerson's address, now commonly called the Divinity School Address, was not popular with faculty, but some students were jolted awake. A member of the student committee who had invited Emerson, Harrison Blake, started up a correspondence with Emerson following the lecture. Blake expressed some concern about his choice of vocation. He was not sure that he was called to be a preacher. Emerson responds in a letter dated August 1st, 1838, and gives some advice of the same ideas that he would later include in Self-Reliance. Emerson writes, "Man seems to me the one fact. The forms of the church and of society, the framework which he creates and casts aside day by day, the whole of duty seems to consist in purging off these accidents and obey the aboriginal truth." Blake listened and decided, even though he had already been graduated from the Divinity School, not to become a preacher, but instead to become a teacher. In mid-19th century America, figures like Blake and Self-Reliance, a sturdy lad, had occupational choices, and now they had to determine if work would become their identity. To such people, Emerson devised a different value system, one rooted in the divine and vital idea of the self.